The job sounded too good to be true. A babysitting gig for Diddy's kids at his sprawling estate, paying more in a weekend than I made in a month. The agency emphasized discretion, warning me to follow every instruction to the letter. At the time, I thought nothing of it. Now, I wish I'd said no. The estate was as grand as you'd imagine, but there was something off about it from the moment I arrived. The gates were towering and cold, closing behind me with a metallic clang that felt more final than it should have. A man in a suit, who introduced himself as Marcus, met me at the entrance. His demeanor was stiff, his eyes sharp as they scanned me up and down. No phones, no questions. You're here to care for the children, nothing more, he said, handing me a small card with a list of rules. Rule 1 stood out immediately. Do not go into the West Wing. The children, Ava and Jace, were polite, but unnervingly quiet for their ages, 10 and 7. They barely made eye contact, answering my questions with one-word responses. At dinner, they sat in eerie silence, their eyes flicking to Marcus, who lingered in the doorway, as if waiting for permission to speak. Later that evening, as I put Ava and Jace to bed, I noticed a strange mark on Ava's arm, a series of small, circular scars that looked almost deliberate. When I asked her about it, she pulled her sleeve down quickly, her eyes darting to the door. You shouldn't ask about that, she whispered, her voice barely audible. After the kids were asleep, I had a chance to explore. The house was immaculate, almost sterile, but it felt suffocating. Every room seemed too perfect, as if no one actually lived there. Garland. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I felt the building loom together. I found a baby monitor in the kitchen and decided to use it, partly to keep an ear on the kids, and partly because the house's oppressive silence was unnerving. Around midnight, the monitor crackled to life. At first, it was just static, but then I heard something, a faint, rhythmic tapping. It wasn't coming from the kids' rooms. It sounded like it was coming from below. Ignoring every instinct to stay put, I followed the sound, which led me to a locked door in the hallway near the West Wing. The tapping grew louder, almost like a heartbeat, vibrating through the floor. My curiosity got the better of me, and I searched the nearby drawers until I found a small key that fit the lock. Behind the door was a staircase, leading down to what looked like a basement. The air grew colder with every step, and the smell, sterile, like a hospital mixed with something metallic, made my stomach turn. At the bottom, I found what looked like a small medical lab, filled with equipment that seemed far too advanced for a private residence. In the corner of the room was a large metal cabinet, its door slightly ajar. Inside were rows of files and vials of some kind of dark liquid. I pulled out one of the files, and my blood ran cold. It had Ava's name on it, along with detailed medical notes and photographs of her scars. Another file was labeled with Jace's name, and beneath it was a stack of files with names I didn't recognize. Before I could process what I was seeing, I heard footsteps upstairs. I quickly shoved the file back into the cabinet and sprinted up the stairs, locking the door behind me. Marcus was standing at the end of the hall, his eyes narrowing as he noticed me. You shouldn't be down here, he said, his voice low and calm, which somehow made it more threatening. Get back to your duties. I nodded, my heart pounding, and hurried back to the living room, where I pretended to be tidying up. Every nerve in my body was screaming at me to leave, but I couldn't abandon the kids. The next morning, I noticed Jace had a new bandage on his arm. When I asked him about it, he said he didn't remember getting hurt. Ava glanced at Marcus, who was watching us from across the room, then shook her head. That night, the baby monitor crackled again, but this time, it wasn't tapping. It was a voice, low and distorted, repeating the same words. Get them out. Get them out. I didn't sleep. I spent the night sitting outside the kids' room, my back against the wall, listening for any sound that didn't belong. At dawn, Marcus informed me that my services were no longer needed. He handed me an envelope stuffed with cash and escorted me to the door. As I was leaving, Ava ran up to me, slipping something into my hand before Marcus pulled her away. It was a small, crumpled note that read, "Please help us." I reported what I'd seen to the agency, but they dismissed me, claiming I must have misunderstood. When I tried to follow up, I found out the agency had suddenly gone out of business. Calls to the mansion went unanswered, and my emails bounced back. It's been years, but I still think about Ava and Jace. I still hear that voice on the baby monitor, those desperate words, and sometimes I wonder if they ever got out, or if they're still there, waiting for someone else to notice. I couldn't shake what had happened. The note from Ava weighed heavy in my pocket, and every attempt to put the situation behind me only deepened my guilt. My nights were plagued with vivid nightmares. Ava and Jace calling for help as Marcus dragged them into that cold, sterile basement. I needed answers. I decided to return to the mansion, even though I knew it was risky. I parked my car a mile away and hiked through the wooded area that bordered the estate. The mansion was dark, except for a faint light glowing in the west wing. I stayed hidden among the trees, watching for movement. Around midnight, a black SUV pulled up to the front gate. 2 men in suits got out, carrying a large, padlocked crate. The gate opened, and they disappeared inside. My pulse raced as I waited for them to leave, but they didn't come back out. I couldn't just walk in, so I searched for another way. Near the back of the property, I found a side gate with an electronic lock. To my surprise, it was slightly ajar, as if someone had forgotten to secure it. I slipped through, my breath visible in the chilly night air. The mansion loomed above me, its massive windows like unblinking eyes. I crept toward the rear entrance and found the door unlocked, just like the gate. My heart thundered in my chest as I stepped inside, the faint scent of antiseptic hitting me immediately. The house was silent, save for a distant hum of machinery, maybe. I moved carefully, avoiding the areas I knew were covered by security cameras. The hum grew louder as I approached the west wing. There, I found the door to the basement wide open. My stomach churned as I descended the stairs. The air grew colder, heavier, and that metallic scent became overwhelming. When I reached the bottom, the scene before me was far worse than I'd imagined. Rows of hospital beds lined the walls, each one surrounded by machines and monitors. Most of the beds were empty, but a few weren't. My knees nearly buckled when I saw Ava lying on one of them, her small frame hooked up to an IV and other equipment. Jace was in the next bed, unconscious, his face pale and sickly. I rushed to Ava's side, whispering her name. Her eyelids fluttered, and she muttered weakly, "You shouldn't have come." Footsteps echoed from above. I panicked, scanning the room for anything to defend myself with. That's when I saw it. A file on a nearby table, labeled with Ava and Jace's names. Flipping through it, I discovered records of blood extractions, strange medical experiments, and chilling notes about long-term viability. The footsteps grew louder, descending the stairs. I didn't have time to think. I grabbed the file, yanked Ava's IV out, and lifted her into my arms. She was too weak to walk, but she whispered, "Take Jace, too." I hesitated, my eyes darting between Jace and the stairwell. The footsteps stopped, and Marcus's voice echoed down, "You've made a mistake coming back." My hands trembled as I placed Ava back on the bed and reached for Jace. I couldn't carry them both. Tears streamed down my face as I whispered, "I'll come back for him. I promise." I hoisted Ava and bolted up the stairs. Marcus's shadow loomed at the top, but I didn't stop. I slammed into him, knocking him off balance, and sprinted toward the back door. Outside, the cold air hit us like a wall. I ran until my legs burned, carrying Ava through the woods to my car. As I drove away, her faint voice broke the silence. "They won't let us go." When I looked in the rearview mirror, I swore I saw headlights following us, but they disappeared after a few miles. I took Ava to the nearest hospital, lying about how I'd found her. She was admitted under a false name, and I told the staff I was her legal guardian. The next day I returned to the mansion for Jace, but the property was empty. The gates were chained shut, and a for sale sign hung from the fence. It was as if no one had ever lived there. I reported everything to the police, but without solid proof or a current address, they dismissed my claims. The file I'd taken had vanished, along with any chance of exposing what I'd seen. Ava recovered physically, but she refuses to talk about what happened. She stares out windows, flinching at every sound, and sometimes whispers, "He's watching." I still see Jace in my dreams, lying in that cold bed, waiting for me to come back. And every time I close my eyes, I hear Marcus's voice, "You've made a mistake coming back." Sometimes, I wonder if he was right.